In the early hours of Saturday morning, as firefighters tackled a blaze in a car parked in a lane of Blackheath, they discovered a body hidden in the boot.
News of the horrific murder of 21-year-old Gagandeep Singh sent shockwaves through the community.
His life was tragically cut short by barbaric people.
Beaten unconscious, he was bundled into a car boot before being set alight.
He was still alive at that point. Just an horrific way to die.
His murder would traumatise the family.
Having to see the burnt body, I don't know how we got through that. Nobody knows the pain inside me.
He was betrayed by those closest to him.
I just still don't understand how you can kill your friend.
Best friends torn apart over a shared love interest.
If he helped her carry out this revenge fantasy, maybe he had a better hope of winning her round.
But how did these teens get caught up in murder?
They have taken everything away from us. We can never be a normal family.
Gagandeep Singh left his home in Bexley Heath one February evening and never came back.
Every day I'm waiting for my son. I never feel he's dead. I don't know, this is only my feeling or every mother's feeling who is like me. Gagandeep was very loving, caring, mature for his age. He was 3 years older than me. As a brother, it was the normal arguing between brothers and sisters, the way the way every household is. He's very lovely person, very, very soft, very kind. He always helps people.
The Gagan that I knew, he was sound. Not a bad bone in him. He was a really calm person, very relaxed.
Sikhism was very important for him, and that's why he had his own Sikh channel as well.
I'd just like to wish everybody a happy, healthy and prosperous new year.
He started presenting program. The channel is very successful that time, very, very successful.
Gagandeep was popular and well-liked amongst the community and attended his local temple regularly. Here he met his best mate, Harinder Shoka.
Harinder Shoka, he was diabetic, quite weak, very shy and very polite. He would be at our house almost every day.
Gagan used to look at him as a younger brother. At one point, we wanted to take him on to work at the station.
Gagandeep had given him a car. He could borrow money, come for dinner. So that's the sort of level of friendship they had.
The pair became inseparable. But within a few years, that close friendship started to crack when teenager Mundil Mahil entered the picture.
Mundil was very bright, very intelligent, very good looking, well liked, quite a bright future ahead of her.
Aspiring to become a doctor, Mundil had applied to read medicine at Brighton and Sussex University. It was around this time when she met Shoka, then 17.
Mundil and Shoka met each other at a Sikh martial arts event and went on to nurture a friendship in which Shoka seemed to start to develop intense romantic feelings for her.
Shoka was sort of infatuated with Mundil, as by all accounts a lot of men were. He had declared his love for her. I don't think the infatuation cut both ways. She decided that they would be better off as just good friends.
Even though Mundil had rejected him, Harinder remained infatuated. But the aspiring GP had already caught the eye of his best mate Gagandeep, and he contacted her on social media.
Mundil accepted his Facebook invitation when she saw that they shared a mutual friendship in Shoka.
A few months later, in July 2009, they met for the first time in person.
They were both from very respectable families. They were both devoted to their religion. It's easy to see why they would get on.
Gagandeep and Mundil's friendship intensified 2 months later, in September 2009, following a shocking family tragedy.
My dad was murdered in India. So it was quite hard for us as a family.
Gagandeep's father, Charanjit, was executed in a contract killing ordered by his best friend over a financial dispute.
After my dad's death, my mum told Gagandeep to be careful of who his friends are. She still says it to me, because my father was killed by a very close friend. It's your own that harm you.
After losing his dad, he became the man of the house. Took a lot of responsibilities on.
Coping with our dad's death, studying, running our family business, and then setting up his own TV channel. I don't know how we did it.
In the wake of his father's murder, Gagandeep opened up to Mundil, who was now in her first year at Brighton and Sussex University. They often spoke on the phone and online.
I think she understood, perhaps not what he was going through, but sort of his relationship with his family and things like that. And he sort of became almost emotionally dependent on her.
But their new bond was a blow to Harinder Shoka, who was still in love with Mundil.
For Shoka, the growing relationship between Gagandeep and Mundil would likely to have been tinged by feelings of rejection and feelings perhaps of jealousy.
There was this sense that Gagandeep was the golden boy. He came from this very wealthy family, but he'd struck out and he'd made a name for himself as well. Whereas Shoka, he dropped out of school, he was a training electrician.
Mundil would come to refer to Shoka as her gangster friend.
I think she was a young girl who'd led quite a sheltered existence. I mean, Shoka is not the traditional sort of East End Reggie Gray sort of figure by any stretch of the imagination.
Competing for Mundil's friendship, tensions grew between Gagandeep and Shoka.
In this love triangle, if you want to say, I think their friendship broke down, and that's a lot to do with the fact that Mundil was the centre of attention for Gagandeep and for Shoka.
But Gagandeep and Mundil's closeness set off alarm bells at home.
In our culture, there is no girlfriend-boyfriend, only straight marriage. This girl ring nearly 30 times a day to Gagan.
My mum didn't like the fact that she visited our house at night. For someone who belongs to the Sikh community, that's not very respectful to visit a boy's house so late at night.
I asked Gagan, you has affair with this girl? He said, she is my friend, Mom.
Despite his family's concerns and the relationship breakdown with his best mate, Gagandeep continued to speak to Mundil and even went down to Brighton to see her. But his visit one night in February would be his last.
We spent the day together, the whole day, fixing a machine that we had got from my mum. He left home at around 7 in the evening. It was the last time that I saw him.
On one February night in 2011, Gagandeep Singh left his house in Bexley Heath, where he lived with his mum and sister. He was driving to Brighton to meet 19-year-old medical student Mundil Mahil. His close friendship with Mundil had driven a wedge between him and his best mate, Harinder Shoka, who was besotted with her. Gagandeep and Mundil's friendship also caused friction at home.
My mum told him that she doesn't like the girl very much. The night he left, Gagandeep had told friends that he was going to Brighton to see Mundil. However, at home he didn't tell us. He said he was going to a party.
I think he had sort of romantic intentions. We'd stopped off at a service station on the M25. He bought this cuddly toy, so he clearly thought that he was going down to spend an amiable evening with Mundil Mahil.
This is the last image of Gagandeep seen alive. Seven hours after setting off on the 60-mile journey to Brighton, police discover Gagandeep's burnt-out car down a secluded lane in the London suburb of Blackheath. And Gagandeep is missing.
A passing police car had actually seen the vehicle on fire and had called the fire brigade. Once the fire had been put out, they searched the vehicle and the body was found in the boot, wrapped in a duvet, tied with some wire flex. What you're faced with there is, okay, well, what's happened? We had the registration number of the vehicle, which linked back to Gagandeep, and we deployed very quickly officers to the family.
Please come. 5 o'clock in the morning. They knocked the door. They said, I find a body in your son's car. That time I'm scared. Who is that in my son's car?
To piece together what has happened, the next 24 hours are crucial to the investigation. Evidence must be secured and witnesses identified.
You can't take your foot off the gas because you'll never get that time back again.
The charred corpse is unidentifiable, so forensic investigators take DNA samples in order to determine who the victim is. Scouring the area for clues, the team discover a CCTV camera at the end of the lane, which provides a possible breakthrough.
It was of 2 people running from the scene. It's extremely grainy, in fact so insignificant you couldn't really determine race or sex, but there was a view that one of them was wearing a turban.
Police said, where is Gagan? They said, I don't know. They asked me, your son taken a drug? I said, no. And this type of question, they scared me. My son done something wrong. He killed somebody. I think if he done this type of thing, maybe he run from police.
Despite the possible implications, Gagandeep's family hope that the man in the turban on the CCTV is him.
Friends and family were very worried about where Gagan was. We were putting appeals out on Facebook. Friends were sending messages to everyone trying to find him.
Gagandeep used to hang out at the home of his old mate, Harinder Shoka, who lives within walking distance of the crime scene.
I called Harinder Shoka just to see if he knows where Gagandeep was. And I'm crying, saying, do you know where he is? He hasn't been home. Then he laughed, he giggled, and he said, no, I don't know where Gagandeep is. So I've put the phone down, thinking, why is he giggled?
To try and determine what has happened to Gagandeep, the police traced the route of his car from the previous evening.
We started to do some work on automatic number plate recognition from the vehicle registration, and from that we were able to determine that the night before that vehicle had gone around the M25 to a service station, and we were later to obtain CCTV of him buying a cuddly toy. Then the car went down the M23 towards Brighton, and we started to look very carefully at that particular link, that geographic location.
The significance of Brighton is revealed following a phone call from a friend who provides Gagandeep's family with a vital piece of information.
We thought that he's gone to a party. The friend has told me no, he went to see Mundell last night. So I had Mundell's number. I called her and asked, do you know where Gagandeep is? And she said to me, she doesn't. And when I told Mundell that I know he came there, she within seconds changed what she was saying and said, oh yes, he did come, but he didn't come inside. And that's how I knew she was lying. And that's what I told the police straight away.
Officers head to Mundell's student house on Gladstone Place, but no one's home. They canvass the area for witnesses and uncover another piece of compelling evidence.
We identified a neighbour. The neighbour said, we saw what we thought was some suspicious activity. We'd heard some commotion. We looked out of the window and we saw 2 guys carrying out a bulky object, placing it in the boot of a car. They wrote down the registration number, as it turned out was the registration number of Gagandeep's vehicle. The way the investigation was developing was, despite the fact that there hadn't been a formal identification of the body in the car, we were now working on the premises that it was likely to be him.
The police are desperate to question Mundell. An all-points warning goes out to ports all around the UK in case she should try to leave the country.
She was certainly aware that we were looking for her. I mean, our view was she was trying to buy time for herself.
Back in London, Gagandeep's family are clinging to the hope that he is the man in the turban captured on the CCTV. They anxiously await the forensic DNA findings.
The police gave us small bits of information throughout the day. They had to do DNA tests and actually figure out who it actually was in the car. I think at 8 or 9 in the evening is when it was confirmed that it's him, that it was Gagandeep in the boot of the car. After my brother's death, I took my mum to go and see him. Having to see the burnt body is something I can't believe. I don't know how we got through that. There was no skin. He had gone charcoal colour. His eyes had sunk in. He didn't even look like a human. It was scary, but he was my brother, so I had to go.
Gagandeep's death is the second tragedy to hit the family. 15 months earlier, their father had been murdered in India.
It's something like a movie. We didn't think that it would happen twice to us.
Gagandeep Singh's remains were discovered in the early hours of Saturday morning after the car was found on fire in Blackheath.
I was devastated when I found out he had passed away. It was such a shock. Why would someone do that to him? Makes no sense to me. His mum struggled a lot. You could see it on her face. She lost everything.
It was just too much for it to sink in of what's actually happened. I think it still hasn't. I don't think it ever will.
News of Gagandeep's murder continues to spread. 20 hours have passed since the burning car was discovered, and the police are struggling to identify the figures on the CCTV. They finally track down Mundil's housemate, who names a friend that Mundil met at the train station the night of the death. Shockingly, the teen is well known to Gagandeep.
We started to look at CCTV, at key locations. One of the most important elements was the depiction at Brighton railway station.
Captured on camera with Mundil is the teen who Gagandeep viewed as a brother, Harinder Shoka.
We couldn't believe it. Someone like him, someone like Harinder, that wasn't his character, it wasn't what he showed us. It was very, very hard.
If you look at the images, it appears they're sort of laughing and joking, which is, quite chilling.
Also captured on CCTV arriving in Brighton with Shoka is 19-year-old Darren Peters, who Mundil's flatmates have identified from the night Gagandeep died.
He was a friend of Shoka's. He was a bicycle mechanic with a sort of low-level criminal record. I mean, it was petty stuff. And I think once Shoka and Peters are in the frame, that CCTV from Blackheath starts to make a bit more sense.
In the early hours of Sunday morning, less than a day since the discovery of Gagandeep's body in the boot, police arrest Shoka at his home near Blackheath. Once in custody, he refuses to answer any questions. But Mundil is ready to talk to detectives.
We were contacted by Mundil Marhill. She innocuously spoke to us and said, I'm due to go to meditation in East London. Do you need me to come to the police station? And our position was, well, yeah, actually urgently, because we've got some questions we'd like to put to you regarding this incident.
Mundil surrenders herself at the police station where she is questioned by officers.
Her position from the outset was that yes, Gagandeep had gone to her address. There had been some degree of a dispute that had occurred there, but that Gagandeep had left the address safe and well, which was a clear lie. No mention of him being bundled out, wrapped in a duvet or anything of that nature.
She's sort of lying, dissembling, sort of not quite telling the whole truth. She knows that, I guess in her heart of hearts, that the plot, what has happened, is going to come out.
On further questioning, Mundell makes a serious accusation against Gagandeep.
She subsequently alleged that there'd been an incident where 6 months previously she describes an attempted rape, and she took upon herself to what she described as teach him a significant or serious lesson.
Mundell implicates both Shoker and Peters as being at her house the night of the murder.
She's engaged in this plot to entice Gagandeep down to Brighton, get a good speaking to, and that would be it. We managed to determine from her phone traffic that she'd been in contact with Shoker, and she was in turn passing on updates from the victim's progress to him.
Police also discover an 80-minute call between Mundell and Shoker moments after Gagandeep's car was set alight. But the most damning piece of evidence was yet to come.
He said, I done the job, now I am ready to go jail for you 21 years. You waiting for me?
The boast about 21 years, it all goes back to this infatuation. And I think Shoker saw it, it was his chance to sort of get in there and to definitively prove his love. He was willing to spend 21 years in prison for her.
Tonight, a man and a woman, both aged 19, are in custody. They're being questioned on suspicion of murder.
Detectives don't have to look far for the last suspect, Darren Peters.
He was arrested at work, and then when they went to search his home, they found 2 petrol cans.
Within 48 hours of discovering Gagandeep's charred remains, police have 3 teenagers held in custody on suspicion of murder. It would take 9 months for the case to be brought before the Old Bailey, where only the most serious of criminal cases are heard.
I had never been into a court before. It was quite a scary experience. But we wanted to know exactly what had happened that night.
3 teens are awaiting trial for the horrific murder of 21-year-old Gagandeep Singh.
Gagan was bundled into the boot of a car and driven to Blackheath, where it was torched.
His life is tragically cut short by barbaric people.
His death has devastated his family and friends, as well as the local community. They all came together to mark his life.
Gagandeep's funeral was a very big funeral. We had people attend from all over the world. We did as much as we could. We wanted to give him a very nice send-off. We had photos on the coffin so people could remember him as he was, not as what they did to him.
With Gagandeep finally laid to rest, his family prepared themselves for the case to be heard at the Old Bailey.
The trial was almost 4 months long. Me and my mum would go every single day and listen to what had happened 5 days a week.
The jury heard how Gagandeep had been besotted with defendant Mundell Marhill, a 19-year-old medical student. Vying for her love was trainee electrician and Gagandeep's former best mate, Harinder Shoker, who pleads not guilty to murder.
Shoker in the courtroom didn't lift his head up, didn't make direct eye contact with me and my family, where Mundell would stand there and stare at us.
Both Marhill and Peters also plead not guilty to the murder charges brought against them.
You've got Peters and Shoker, who are perhaps not the same sort of status as Mundell, and I think Mundell, even when she's there in the high security dock, she thinks herself a little bit above it all. What we sort of learned over the course of the trial was that Mundell was very cold and calculating, almost with this sort of vengeful streak.
The roots of Gagandeep's murder are traced back to the breakdown of his close friendship with Mundell 6 months before he died.
The cooling of Mundell and Gagandeep's relationship came about after what was referred to by her barrister as an attempted rape at her student house in Brighton.
He misreads the signs and tries to get into bed with her. She tells him to leave. He expresses huge remorse, very upset that he has crossed the line in this way, a line that he recognises that he's crossed.
We never got to the bottom of this sexual assault. It was certainly never formally reported to anyone.
What she says is that I couldn't go to the police, I couldn't tell anyone about it because I'm a devout Sikh, and in my community, if I told anyone, they would say, well, it's your fault. He'd spend the night at your house. So I think there's that frustration, there's that bitterness, and of course, Gagandeep is very apologetic, he wants to win her back round.
He subsequently spends several months, in Mundil's words, bombarding her with texts begging for forgiveness, I suppose. They became a source of harassment for her, and after the event, cuts off any sort of friendship with him and starts to respond very aggressively towards him as a person.
From his witness statements that we obtained from other residents, it became very clear that Mundil had a degree of animosity towards Gagandeep. Mundil herself had said to one of the other students, I'm going to kill Gagandeep. When someone says that, you think, okay, you know, they don't really mean it.
I think she stewed for a little while. She talked to people about what had happened. Then she went to talk to her gangster friends up in East London to see what could be done, what solution they could find.
Her gangster friend was in fact Gagandeep's best mate, Harinder Shoker.
I do think he seems to be the one that she has trusted with the story, and she knows his devotion means that he won't let her down.
Shoker was in love with Mundil and hated the fact that she had been close to Gagandeep.
The increasing closeness between Gagandeep and Mundil, it would probably have eaten away at Shoker. And I think the sort of relationship with Shoker and Gagandeep, that goes back to Gagandeep being the golden boy and Shoker being the gangster, if you like. But it's easy to see how that could sort of, over the years, sort of fester into sort of some kind of resentment. And I think if he helped her carry out this sort of almost revenge fantasy, then maybe he had a better hope of winning her round.
Shoker takes to social media to vent his anger.
There was a Facebook thread where Shoker had commented on Gagandeep's business page, swearing about Gagandeep and saying, oh, he's a fake Sikh. Then Gagandeep's other friends started coming forward saying Shoker said this about him, Shoker said that about him. And it all started coming together. That's how much he hated Gagandeep.
Shoker and Mundil plot to teach Gagandeep a lesson he'll never forget.
The facts appear to be that they would confront Gagandeep in her home.
Her story was that they were bringing in this religious guru who knew Gagandeep so that he could be put right on his attitude towards women. What she claimed she was planning in her defence and what actually transpired that night in Brighton, it is a whole different ballgame.
On the 24th of February 2011, Mundil puts the plan into action.
Gagandeep gets the message from Mundil that he's been waiting for months that suggests there might be some kind of reconciliation on the cards. And she tells him to come down to Brighton for 11 o'clock at night. He does have his reservations because things have been so cold up to this point.
There was evidence of a text message from Gagandeep to Mundil saying, in relation to them meeting that evening, you know, are we going to be civil or do you want me dead?
And she reassures him that they are going to. He might have had his suspicions, but I don't think he could have suspected what was actually going to happen to him when he got there.
Mundil invites Gagandeep to come to her flat in Brighton on the 25th of February 2011.
She knew that he liked her. I believe she had Gagandeep wrapped around her finger and Harinder.
Harinder Shoker buys a one-way ticket to Brighton. He boards a train without the religious guru.
The religious guru was unable to make it for whatever reason, and that's when Darren Peters, the petty criminal, the cycle mechanic, the hired muscle, if you like, gets dragged into the whole thing. They're on a train at the same time that Gagandeep is driving his Mercedes down there.
He thought he was going down that evening because there was a glimmer of hope that he was going to clear the air. He thought he was going down there for anything but confrontation.
At 8:30 p.m, Mundell walks into Brighton Station to collect Shoker and Peters and drives them back to her student house on Gladstone Place. Shoker and Peters hide in her bedroom and wait for Gagandeep to arrive.
She set everything up by telling her flatmates, don't go down there, something is going to happen down there.
Gagandeep arrived and she invited him to the basement where her bedroom was.
As soon as he's walked through the door, one of the two out of Harinder and Darren have hit him with a tripod, and that's how he fell to the floor.
Mundell leaps across the bed and leaves the room as soon as the frenzied assault starts.
Gagan was screaming for Mundell when he was getting hit.
And by all accounts, it's quite a brutal attack, with a camera tripods and various other implements as well.
He had serious injuries, life-threatening injuries. There was bruising to the face, severe blunt trauma, there was swelling of the brain. It was Mundell's position that there would be minimal violence, he would get a good speaking to, and that would be it.
Shoker hits Gagandeep with such force that he fractures his hand. The ferocious attack lasts almost 20 minutes until Gagandeep is unconscious.
They rolled Gagandeep's body in Mundell's duvet and carried this body out to the boot of the Mercedes that he had come down in.
Having tied Gagandeep's hands with a sat-nav cable they found in his car, they race back to London, with him secured in the boot.
In the trial, Shoker said he was diabetic and he hadn't eaten or taken his insulin, so he was all very hazed and he was driving back to London on autopilot, and it was almost as if he was living in a dream.
Darren refers to himself as having been like in The Transporter, which is a film about a hitman driving supervillain. This filmic narrative describes the euphoria, perhaps, around committing such a violent crime and speeding up to the capital in this nice car.
I suppose one school of thought is that perhaps they're even taking Gagandeep to have this talking to by the religious guru. But they pop the boot open. He's been beaten quite badly. He's unconscious. They think, oh my God, what have we done?
They haven't checked the body for a pulse, but suspecting they've killed him, they buy 2 cans of petrol.
They've then driven all the way to Greenwich and parked up on this road, which I believe they had pre-planned. Not a road you'd randomly turn your car into, it's a road that they've thought about, that's the road where no one will come at night time. And they've parked up, poured petrol over the car, the boot, and then set it alight.
At trial, the post-mortem reveals a devastating detail about events that night.
The pathologist advised us that there were soot deposits in his throat and lungs, which would have indicated that he was still breathing, in other words, breathing in toxic fumes. So we were able to determine that he was still alive at that point. Just an horrific way to die.
When we found out that he would have still been alive if they didn't set the car on fire, that's something where we wish that they had just left him and walked away. He still would have been alive. Even if he couldn't talk, he couldn't speak, he couldn't walk. Just having him at home. But they didn't even do that.
A serious degree of conflict arises between the defendants' stories. Shoker blames Peters for Gagandeep's violent beating, for buying the petrol and setting the fire, all of which Peters denies.
His defence was he didn't know it was going to be quite so serious. He was described by his own barrister as being someone of limited intelligence. He was the hired muscle. I don't think he ever really tried to get away from that.
Peters responds by pointing the finger at Shoker.
Harinder didn't have a story to stick to. He just said he didn't mean to kill him.
Shoker, far from sort of portraying this sort of gangster image, tried to put on this wholesome Sikh boy routine.
He's diabetic. In court, he would request for a chocolate and a sweet drink, when he would be sitting in the dock. I think that was his way of possibly getting sympathy from the jury and everyone in the courtroom.
But the mask did slip when he was actually giving his own evidence. He was being led back from the witness box to the dock, and he just snapped at one of the pupil barristers there and said, "What is your problem?" It was quite a key moment in the trial, I think.
Shoker is implicated further by Mundell, who tells the jury that he went far beyond their agreement and possibly had his own agenda when it came to murdering Gagandeep.
Well, her defence was that, well, there was this plan, but, I never knew it was going to go that far. She was sort of set herself apart from Shoker and Peters in the dock. I mean, she gave it everything that she could do. She was the devout Sikh girl, she was the medical student, wanted to go off and work for Médecins Sans Frontières, charities abroad and doing aid work. She painted a very, very wholesome picture of herself.
After 3.5 months, the trial draws to a close. It would take the jury 40 hours to deliberate before returning verdicts for the 3 teens. But one verdict in particular would cause Gagandeep's family further heartache.
Well, I don't see where the justice is. They should receive the maximum sentence.
Following a trial at the Old Bailey, Judgment Day has arrived for the 3 teens accused of the brutal murder of 21-year-old Gagandeep Singh.
During the trial, the prosecution said that Mr. Singh's killers had decided to play God. As the verdicts were read out, there were screams and crying in the public gallery.
Trainee electrician Harinder Shoker, who had once been Gagandeep's best mate, is found guilty of his murder. Shoker's school friend, Darren Peters, is convicted of manslaughter.
I think it's probably fair to say that the jury decided that Shoker was the prime mover in Gagandeep's eventual fate. He was the one behind his body being burnt in the car. Peters was the hired muscle. He didn't do anything to stop it. That's why he got the manslaughter conviction.
The jury heard evidence which proved the teenage medical student, Mundell Marhill, had lured Gagandeep to Brighton so he could be taught a lesson. She is acquitted of murder, but convicted of GBH with intent, a verdict that angers Gagandeep's family.
The family are very upset, angry, quite frankly astonished that this verdict of GBH with intent was given. At the very least, they were expecting murder.
Mundell's conviction is a bit more difficult to explain, and I suppose it must be because the jury accepted that she knew he was going to be seriously assaulted that night in Brighton, but she couldn't have foreseen what actually happened when that car got back to London.
The judge told all 3 defendants that lengthy jail terms are inevitable. They'll return here to be sentenced next Wednesday.
Mundell, have you got anything to say?
Attempting to hide from the cameras, Mundell Marhill, the medical student who lured the man who loved her into a trap which ended in his brutal death.
Her actions were calculating, and that she was at the heart of a criminal conspiracy with Shoker and Peters of tricking Gagandeep to Brighton to seriously assault him, which ultimately resulted in his death. All this from a medical student embarking upon a career in the caring profession.
The verdicts offer some closure for Gagandeep's long-suffering family, but they want to know what jail time the 3 teens will serve.
Darren Peters was sentenced to 12 years, Harinder Shoker to 22 years imprisonment. Both played a part in beating Gagandeep Singh unconscious, placing him in the boot of his car and setting him on fire while he was still alive.
Shoker, who had told Mundell he would do 21 years for her in a sort of poetic twist, got 22 years. This was someone that the family had invited into their home. For him to turn around and betray them like that, well, it was something that no one could really have foreseen.
I still can't get my head around it. But Harinder can kill someone. Justice has been served in the sense that he's not going to be out for a very long time. He's ruined our life, but I have that a tiny bit of satisfaction that his life is also ruined.
Mundell's conviction of GBH with intent can carry a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. But she is handed 6 years, which is considered excessive by her legal team.
Mundal Mahil will be appealing this conviction and sentence. We know that she will continue to enjoy the loving support of her family and many friends, all of whom are shocked by this conviction, as they know she is not the person described by the prosecution and the judge during these proceedings.
In 2013, Shoker appealed his conviction, whilst Peters challenged his sentence. Mundal petitioned for both her conviction and sentence to be quashed. All three were unsuccessful. To this day, Gagandeep's family remain disappointed with Mundal's conviction and sentence.
In my opinion, I think she got away with it very lightly. That's what makes me very angry.
Mundal Mahil was convicted of grievous bodily harm with intent. That was the jury's decision, and that's a decision that I have to respect, and I do respect as part of our sort of judicial process. But I think the irony of it is, had it not been for Mundal Mahil's actions, Gagandeep would not have been murdered.
8 years on, Gagandeep's family are still struggling to move past his terrible death.
I think any loss of any young person or any relative is tragic and has a massive impact on the family. It's the horrific nature of how Gagandeep met his death would have aggravated the grief of the family, I think. It was only sort of 18 months previously that Gagandeep's father had been murdered in India. The coincidence of 2 homicides within one family in totally different circumstances is just too incredible to even think about.
You just don't imagine it. You don't think it had happened to your family, not twice. We still don't believe why. Why did it happen to us?
Gagandeep's murderer, Harinder Shoker, is still behind bars, but his accomplice, Darren Peters, has been released from prison.
Darren Peters living a perfectly normal life. He's got a new life ahead of him. But what are we left with? There's nothing. My mum's never going to get her son back.
Sometimes I think I am not alive. 2-3 times a day I think I want to die.
Mundal was released on licence in 2014, having served half her sentence. It is reported that she has since become a personal trainer and worked with a charity that supports women leaving the criminal justice system. She went on to marry a Labour councillor who in January 2019 was confirmed as the mayor-elect for Redbridge in London.
I challenged the fact that he was becoming mayor and she was going to be mayoress. I started a petition. I contacted as many newspapers as I could, sent emails to the Labour Party, and Mundal's husband has then done a press release and said that he's stepping down.
It's a small victory for Gagandeep's family, but it cannot change the events of that fateful day in February 2011.
I don't wish them dead. I don't wish that. I just wish that they live day in, day out like we do. I feel that all 3 of them have taken everything away from us. We can never be a normal family again.